The dust on Vores IV never settled. It hung in the air like thin smoke, red and dry, catching the light of the planet's pale sun and turning everything the color of old rust. It coated boots, filtered into gear, and left a gritty taste at the back of every throat. The survey team had been out in the craterlands for 3 hours, and every one of them looked like they had been rolling in brick powder. Corporal Derek Hale did not mind it. He had grown up in a dry place, the kind of place where the wind carried more dirt than rain, where the ground cracked in summer and the air always tasted faintly of earth. Vores IV felt almost familiar to him in that way, not home, but close enough to be comfortable. He sat on a flat rock a little distance from the rest of the survey team, eating a nutrition bar and watching the horizon. His rifle was rested across his knees, not because he expected trouble, but because that was simply how he always sat when on escort duty. Old habit, the kind that kept people alive. The survey team itself was a mixed group. 4 alien scientists from the Coalition, a pair of Vreth, tall and thin with gray skin and wide amber eyes, and 2 Shalari, shorter and broader, with pale blue-green scales and the constant low clicking sound they made when they were focused on their work. There was one other human on the team, a technician named Ray, who was currently arguing with his scanner about calibration errors and losing the argument badly. And then there was General Raven. Raven was not usually the kind of officer who showed up to mineral surveys. He was Coalition Guard, decorated and senior, the kind of being who had walls full of service honors and a name that younger soldiers spoke carefully. But Vores IV was a politically sensitive site. The mineral deposits here had been disputed between 2 coalition factions for 6 years, and so Raven had come personally to make sure the survey was done cleanly, officially, and without incident. He stood near the portable scanner array, hands clasped behind his back, watching the Shalari scientists work with the patient expression of someone who had learned long ago that waiting was most of the job. Derek finished his nutrition bar, folded the wrapper, and put it in his vest pocket. He looked at the ridge to the north. It was a long shelf of dark rock, dense with the mineral formations that made this planet valuable, tall spires of crystallized ore that jutted out of the ground like broken teeth, some of them 20 meters high. They caught the light strangely, throwing sharp blue shadows across the red dust. He looked at that ridge for a few seconds longer than he normally would have. Something felt different about it. He could not say what. The air was the same. The dust was the same. The pale sun had not moved, but something in the back of his mind, some quiet, animal part of him that had been inherited from a very long line of people who had survived by noticing things, told him the ridge had changed since the last time he looked at it. He stood up slowly and unslung his rifle. "Ray," he said. "Busy," Ray said, not looking up from his scanner. "Look at the north ridge." Ray looked up with the expression of someone who was about to say something irritable. Then he saw the ridge. "What is that?" he said quietly. The Duroc came over the ridge at a walk, but the walk was deceptive. Even at that speed, it covered ground fast. It was enormous, 4 tons of muscle and bone and dark, armored hide, moving with the slow certainty of something that had never needed to hurry because nothing had ever made it. Its head was low, and the 2 horns that swept back and outward from its skull were each as long as Derek's arm, worn smooth and dark at the tips. Its eyes caught the light, small, dark, and very awake. It stopped at the top of the ridge and looked down at the survey team. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then one of the Vreth scientists moved, a fast, sharp sideways step away from the scanner array, and that was enough. The Duroc's head dropped, its massive shoulders bunched, and it came down the ridge at a speed that did not match its size at all. The survey team scattered. The Shalari scientists bolted left, their equipment clattering to the ground. The Vreth went right, moving in long, silent strides. Ray ran straight back toward the transport, yelling something into his comm unit. The scanner array tipped over and broke apart across the red dust. General Raven was already moving, his comm open, his voice sharp and clear. All personnel full retreat, move away from the creature. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. Fall back to the transport and hold position. I am calling in an orbital observation request to track its movement. He looked at his scanner as he moved. The readout on the Duroc was not encouraging. 4,000 kilograms. Charge speed of 62 kilometers per hour on flat ground. High density rated well above standard ballistic resistance. No natural predators cataloged on this continent. Territorial aggression response. High. He clicked his comm again. Do not fire on it. Weapons will agitate it further. Retreat is the protocol. Everyone fall back now. The Duroc reached the base of the ridge and kept coming. Every alien member of the survey team was already running. Raven pulled back toward the transport, watching his scanner, calculating distance and speed. Then he noticed something on the edge of his field of vision and stopped moving. Corporal Derek Hale had not run. He was standing in the open, roughly 40 meters from the oncoming Duroc, rifle held low and at rest. He was not raising it. He was not backing away. He was standing the way a man stands when he has already decided something and is simply waiting for the next moment to arrive. Raven stared at him. The Duroc was still coming. Raven opened his comm. Corporal, fall back. That is a direct order. Derek's voice came back calm and even, like a man answering a question about the weather. Sir, he said, with respect, I don't think running is going to help us here. There are moments in the field that officers remember for the rest of their lives. Not the big battles, not the decorated actions, but the small, quiet moments that arrive without warning and refuse to leave the memory afterward. General Raven had collected several of these across 4 decades of service. He added another one to the list in the next 10 seconds. He watched Corporal Derek Hale stand completely still, while 4 tons of creature bore down toward him across the red dust of Vores IV, and he felt something he had not felt in a long time on a battlefield. He felt genuinely uncertain what was going to happen next. Corporal, he said again, keeping his voice measured and clear the way he had trained himself to do in moments of stress. I need you to fall back to the transport. This is a direct order. Move now. I understand, sir, Derek said through the comm. His voice had not changed at all. I'm asking you to give me 60 seconds. Raven was not a being who gave soldiers 60 seconds to ignore direct orders. He had never done that in his career. His record on command discipline was, frankly, exceptional. He opened his mouth to repeat the order. The Duroc stopped. It had been moving at full charge, a straight line of muscle and momentum aimed at the open craterland and everything in it, and then it stopped. Not slowed, stopped. The way something stops when it encounters a calculation it has not had to make before. It stood roughly 30 meters from Derek, its massive chest heaving, breath blasting out of its wide nostrils in hard, visible puffs in the cool air. Its small dark eyes were fixed on Derek. Raven did not repeat his order. He stood very still and watched. Behind him, the survey team had mostly reached the transport or the cover positions behind the rock formation to the east. Ray had stopped running and was watching from behind the transport's front wheel, his face pale. The Shalari scientists had their scanner up and were recording, because apparently even in a crisis, scientists recorded things. The Vreth had gone very still in the way their species went still when frightened, completely motionless, as if their bodies had decided that invisibility was still on the table. Nobody said anything. Derek had not moved. His rifle was still held low, muzzle pointing at the ground. His body was turned slightly sideways, not away from the creature but not fully facing it either. His head was up. His weight was even on both feet. Raven had spent enough time studying species behavioral profiles that he recognized a posture when he saw one. Derek's body was saying something. He was not sure what. His database on human physical communication was, he now realized, somewhat limited. The Duroc stamped one foot, a heavy impact that sent a small shudder through the dust. It lowered its head so the horns were level and forward, and it made a sound, low, deep, and resonating in a way that could be felt in the chest cavity from 30 meters away. One of the Shalari scientists made a soft sound behind their scanner. "It is going to charge," they said quietly, in the flat tone of someone reading a readout rather than expressing fear. "The posture is consistent with a terminal charge sequence. The animal has committed." "It hasn't committed," Derek said through the open comm. His voice was still even. "It's warning me." A pause. "Corporal," Ravin said carefully, "how do you know the difference?" "Because I grew up around cattle," Derek said. Another pause, longer this time. "You grew up around what?" one of the Vreth asked. Nobody answered them. The Duroc charged. It was not like the first charge down the ridge. That had been fast but open, a creature running toward a target. This charge was committed, head down, horns level, all 4 tons of it moving with the specific, terrible purpose of something that had decided to end a problem. The ground shook. Dust lifted in a low, rolling wave behind it. Derek took one step to the left. Just one step. Small, smooth, almost casual, like a man stepping around a puddle. He moved his body just enough to shift out of the direct line, and he did not run, and he did not raise his rifle, and he did not look away. The Duroc pulled up short again, closer this time, much closer, 15 meters. The air it exhaled hit Derek's face like a warm, damp pressure wave. Nobody on the comm said a word. Ravin realized he had stopped breathing and corrected that. Derek turned his body back to face the creature directly. He brought himself up to his full height, which was not impressive by most species standards. He was an average-built human, not particularly tall, not particularly broad, but something about the way he did it changed the shape of him. He looked larger than he was. Or perhaps more precisely, he looked like something that knew exactly how large it was and had decided that was enough. He looked the Duroc in the eye. The creature stared back at him. "Sir," Ray said quietly from behind the transport, his voice very small, "should someone be doing something?" "No," Ravin said. He was not entirely sure why he said it, but something in the scene in front of him told him that the worst thing anyone could do right now was interrupt it. The Duroc shifted its weight. Once. Twice. Its head moved, not down into the charge posture again, but sideways, a slow swing, as if it was looking at Derek from a slightly different angle to make sure it was seeing what it thought it was seeing. Derek did not move. His hand, the one not holding his rifle, rose slowly to about chest height. Open, palm out, not a weapon, not a threat. Just a hand held out toward 4 tons of confused, agitated animal. Ravin stared at the hand. He had no data on what that gesture meant to a Duroc. He suspected Derek did not either. But Derek was doing it anyway, with the calm certainty of a man who had run out of wrong answers and was working through the remaining options one at a time. The Duroc stood there and breathed, and did not charge and stared. And the Cratolins of Vores IV were very, very quiet. Nobody had told the wind about the standoff. It kept moving across the Cratolins the way it always did, slow, dry, carrying red dust in lazy curls across the open ground. It moved through the broken mineral spires on the ridge and made a thin whistling sound, the same sound it made every hour of every day on Vores IV, completely indifferent to the fact that a human being was currently standing 15 meters from an animal that could kill him by falling on him. Ravin had pulled up his field scanner and aimed it at the Duroc. Not because the readings would change anything, they would not, but because looking at data gave his hands something to do, and right now his hands needed something to do. The creature's heart rate was elevated but not at peak. Its posture had shifted slightly. The head was no longer at full threat height, the horns no longer perfectly level and aimed. These were small changes, the kind a casual observer would miss, but Raven had spent too many years reading tactical situations through scanners to dismiss small changes. Small changes were sometimes the only changes that mattered. He kept watching. Derek had not moved from where he stood. His open palm was still raised, still steady. His rifle was still in his left hand, muzzle pointing at the ground. He had not spoken in almost 2 minutes. He was simply standing there, being a presence, patient, still, and very clearly not running. "What is he doing?" one of the Shalari scientists asked from behind the scanner. Their clicking sound had slowed down, which Raven understood to mean they had shifted from focus into something closer to genuine confusion. "I believe," Raven said carefully, "he is waiting." "Waiting for what?" Raven looked at the scanner, then he looked at Derek, then he looked at the Durok. "I am not certain," he said, "but I believe he is waiting for the animal to make up its mind." The Durok made up its mind. It charged again. This one was shorter than the previous two, a sharp, fast burst of movement, head down, hooves hammering the dust. But it pulled up at about 8 meters, close enough that Raven could see the individual hairs along the ridge of the creature's back standing raised, could see the wet gleam of its dark eyes, could see the dust on its horns, could see Derek's face clearly. Derek had not flinched. He had not stepped back. His open hand had dropped back to his side, not in retreat but simply because the gesture was done and he had moved past it. He was standing with his weight forward now, not backward, not leaning away from the animal but toward it, the way a person leans into wind. His eyes were on the creature's eyes and they had not moved. Raven had read, in a very old xenological file about human beings that had been compiled by an early coalition contact team, that humans were persistence hunters, that they had, on their own planet, hunted by following things until the things gave up. He had read it and moved on, cataloged it as interesting historical context, and not thought about it again. He thought about it now. Derek took a step forward. Not backward, forward. One step, slow and deliberate, closing the 8 meters between himself and the Durok to 7. The Durok made a sound, not the deep resonating warning from before but something shorter, sharper. A burst of breath through its nostrils like a small explosion. It shifted its weight back, the way a heavy thing shifts when it is calculating whether to hold its ground or move. Derek took another step. "He is walking toward it," Ray said from behind the transport, in the voice of someone who could see a thing clearly but could not quite convince himself it was real. "Yes," Raven said. "He is walking toward the Durok." "Yes. On purpose." Raven looked at the calm, deliberate pace of Derek's feet moving across the red dust. Very much on purpose. 6 meters now. 5. Derek was moving slowly, but he was not stopping. Each step placed carefully, weight shifting smooth and low, no sudden moves, nothing that could be read as aggression or panic. Just a man walking, as if the specific destination did not matter much and the walk was its own point. The Durok's head came up slightly. Not the threat posture, the other direction, up and back. The head rising the way an animal's head rises when something is not computing the way it should. Its dark eyes tracked Derek. They moved with the kind of focus that indicated the creature was not thinking about the rest of the survey team, was not thinking about the mineral ridge behind it, was not thinking about anything except the small, walking thing that was doing exactly the opposite of what everything else ever did. Everything ran from a Durok. That was the simple truth of this continent. The native ground fauna ran. The coalition survey drones ran, or more precisely, were programmed to retreat from biological mass above a certain threshold, which amounted to the same thing. The soldiers ran. The scientists ran. This thing was walking toward it. 4 meters. Raven had given many orders in his career. Some of them he had given at significant personal cost, because they were the right orders, and the right orders were not always the comfortable ones. He had ordered retreats that saved hundreds of lives. He had ordered advances that cost some. He had ordered things that he still turned over in his mind, sometimes in the quiet hours, checking them from different angles, making sure they still held up. He did not order Derek to stop. He could have. The comm was open. Derek would have heard him, and Derek was a soldier, and soldiers followed orders. But Raven looked at the space between Derek and the Duroc, now 3 meters, now less, and he kept his mouth shut and his hand away from the comm, because something in the way this scene was moving told him that the worst thing he could add to it was the sound of a voice. Derek stopped, 2 meters from the Duroc, close enough to touch it if he had a long enough arm, close enough that the creature's breath was visibly moving the front of his jacket. He stood there, he breathed. He did not look away from the animal's eyes. The Duroc was very still. The wind moved across the craterlands and lifted a small curl of red dust between them, and the dust moved through the 2-meter space and disappeared, and neither the man nor the beast moved at all. Raven's scanner showed the Duroc's heart rate declining. He stared at that number for a moment to make sure he was reading it correctly. It was declining. "What," said one of the Vreth scientists softly, to no one in particular, "is he doing to it?" Nobody answered. Nobody had an answer. They were all watching the same thing, and none of them had language for it, because the language for it lived in a very old part of human experience that none of them had ever needed to know about. Derek Hale stood 2 meters from something that could kill him without trying, and he was not afraid, or if he was, the fear was somewhere so deep inside him that not one cell of his body was reporting it outward. He just stood there, and the Duroc stood there, and the dust moved between them. Time does a strange thing in moments like that one. It does not slow down or speed up. That is a thing people say afterward to explain how it felt, but it is not quite accurate. What it actually does is become very detailed. Things that usually pass unnoticed fill up with information. The exact way light falls across a patch of ground, the sound that wind makes when it moves through a specific shape of rock, the particular rhythm of a large animal's breathing, the angle of a man's shoulders. Details that the brain, under ordinary circumstances, discards as irrelevant become suddenly important, each one arriving with its own small weight. Raven noticed all of it. He noticed the way the pale sun of Vores IV was beginning to slide toward the western ridge, so that the shadows from the mineral spires were getting longer and thinner across the red dust. He noticed that the clicking sound from the Shalari scientists had stopped completely, and that was unusual, because they clicked even in their sleep. He noticed that Ray had moved from behind the transport's front wheel to the side of the transport, which meant Ray was trying to get a better view, which meant Ray had gone past fear into something else. He noticed that Derek had not moved in 4 minutes. 4 minutes was a long time to stand 2 meters from a Duroc. Raven's scanner had pulled up the species file when the creature first appeared, and he had read it in the fast, efficient way he read all tactical data, pulling out the relevant points and discarding the rest. What he had pulled out: territorial aggressor, chase response triggered by movement, no record of backing down from confrontation, responsible for 3 equipment losses and 1 serious injury in previous survey missions to this region, rated extreme caution by every coalition field guide published in the last 30 years. What the field guide had not covered, apparently, was what happened when something did not move. The Duroc had made 2 more short forward movements in the first minute of the standoff, not full charges, barely more than lunges, covering a single meter before pulling back. Each time, Derek had held his ground. His feet had not shifted. His weight had not changed. His eyes had not moved from the creature's face. After the second lunge, the Duroc had gone still. That was 4 minutes ago, and it had stayed still. Raven looked at the scanner. Heart rate was down to what the file classified as a resting alert state, elevated from baseline, but no longer in the physiological range associated with active aggression. He looked at this number for a long time, cross-referencing it against the behavioral profile, and then he put the scanner down because the scanner was telling him something that he was not sure he trusted yet. It was telling him the animal was calming down. "General," one of the Shalari scientists said very quietly, in the careful tone of someone who does not want to break something fragile, "the Durok's aggression indicators are declining." "I see that." "That is not." The scientist paused, the way scientists pause when they are about to say something that conflicts with their existing data. "That is not consistent with recorded Durok behavioral responses to proximity of a non-species contact. Typically, closer proximity increases aggression. The established pattern is—" "I am aware of the established pattern," Raven said. He kept his voice low. "The human is not following the established pattern." "No, he is not." Silence. "Do you know why?" the scientist asked. Raven looked at Derek, standing 2 meters from the creature that was supposed to be unkillable and unstoppable and completely unmanageable, standing there like a man waiting for a transport that was slightly late. "No," Raven said, "I do not." Derek moved. Not backward, forward. One hand rising, slow as a cloud moving, until it was extended out in front of him, palm up, at roughly the height of the Durok's lowered nose. He did not reach for the animal. He simply put his hand there in the air between them and held it open. Raven felt Ray make a sound behind him. Not a word, just a sound. The kind of involuntary noise a person makes when they see something that their body reacts to before their brain catches up. The Durok looked at the hand. Its head lowered, not in the threat posture, but in the other way, the curious way, the way a large animal lowers its head when it is trying to get a better look at something small. Its nostrils worked. It was breathing Derek's scent, Raven realized, reading the information that all large animals read when they were deciding how afraid to be of something. Whatever it smelled, it apparently did not smell like prey. The Durok's head moved forward. Just slightly, just a centimeter or two, but it moved toward the open hand, not away from it, and that was, according to every file and field guide and behavioral analysis Raven had read, completely impossible. "It's going to touch him," Ray breathed. It did not touch him. It stopped with its nose about 6 centimeters from Derek's palm and breathed on it, a long, wet, heavy exhale, and held there. Derek did not move his hand, did not pull it back, did not push it forward. He simply let the animal breathe on it and stood there, and his face in profile showed nothing that Raven could read as fear, showed nothing much at all except a kind of watchful patience. 3 more minutes passed. At some point, Raven became aware that he was standing in an undefended position in the open craterland, that he had completely stopped monitoring his team's positions, and that he had not thought about the orbital observation request in quite some time. He became aware of these things and found, to his mild surprise, that he did not particularly care. Whatever was happening 2 meters from Derek Hale was more important than all of it. The Durok made a sound, not the deep warning resonance from before, not the sharp burst of aggression, something else, lower, shorter, almost conversational in its rhythm. Derek made a sound back. Raven's translator did not catch it. It was not a language, just a sound, low in the throat, unhurried. But the Durok's ears moved. The large flat ears that had been pulled back flat in threat posture for the last several minutes came forward, rotating toward Derek the way ears rotate toward something worth listening to. One of the Vreth scientists sat down on the ground behind Raven, not from injury. They simply seemed to need to sit down. Raven understood the impulse. Derek lowered his hand slowly. The Durok's head tracked it, watching. When the hand was back at Derek's side, the animal's head came up again, fully upright now, the horns no longer aimed, the neck no longer bunched. It looked very different at full head height without the threat in its posture. It looked, Raven thought, like what it actually was, a large, wild animal far from home, standing in the open with a creature it had never encountered before, trying to make sense of a situation that did not fit any category it had ever used. The Duroc turned its head and looked at the ridge. Then it looked back at Derek. Derek looked back at it. The standoff had lasted just over 9 minutes. Raven would check the timestamp later and be slightly shocked that it had been that short, because it had felt considerably longer. The Duroc turned away. Not in a rush, not spooked, not fleeing, it simply turned, with the slow, heavy dignity of something that had made a decision and was acting on it, and it walked back toward the ridge, each step placed with weight and certainty. Its broad back moved away across the dust, the dark armor of its hide catching the late afternoon light. It reached the base of the ridge and climbed it without hesitating and disappeared over the other side into the long shadows of the mineral spires. And then it was gone. Derek stood where he was for another moment. Just stood there in the empty craterland, looking at the ridge where the Duroc had been. Then he picked up his rifle from where it had been resting against his leg, turned around, and started walking back toward the transport. He looked, Raven thought, exactly like a man who had gone to do a routine thing and had done it. Nobody said anything. The wind moved across the craterlands. The long shadows from the mineral spire stretched out across the red dust. Nobody said anything at all. The transport ride back to the Coalition base took 40 minutes. 40 minutes of 5 alien scientists and 1 other human sitting in a vehicle together, watching the craterlands roll by outside the windows, and the only sound for most of it was the engine and the wind against the hull. At some point, one of the Shalari scientists opened their scanner and began typing notes into it, their clicking louder than usual, fast and concentrated. At some point, Ray pulled out a ration pack and offered one to Derek. Derek took it and ate it. That was about all that happened until they reached the base. Derek was quiet on the ride and nobody pushed him. That was partly because he was quiet by nature and people had learned not to push him, and partly because nobody was quite sure what to say. There was no good opening for it. Good work standing there did not feel adequate. Why did you do that felt accusatory. How did you know it would work was perhaps the most honest question, and it was the one everyone was circling around, but something about asking it in the transport felt wrong. Like asking a magician to explain the trick while the audience is still applauding. Raven sat up front and did not say anything either. He was composing in his head the incident report he would have to file. Coalition protocol required a report any time a survey mission encountered a Class 3 biological hazard, and a Duroc definitely qualified. The report had a standard format: incident description, personnel actions, outcomes, recommendations. He had filed this kind of report before. He knew the format well. He was having trouble fitting what had happened into the format. Back at the base, the team split up to decontaminate and log their equipment. Derek went through the process the way he always did, systematic, thorough, unhurried, and was done in about 20 minutes. He was sitting outside the equipment bay with his jacket off and a cup of water in his hand when Raven found him. Raven stood in front of him for a moment. Derek looked up and did not say anything, which was typical. He had that particular quality of being able to wait without it feeling hostile. It was simply how he existed in silences, comfortably, without needing to fill them. "I need to ask you something," Raven said. "All right," Derek said. "How did you know the animal would not kill you?" Derek considered this. He took a drink of water and looked at the ground between his boots, and it was clear from his face that he was not avoiding the question, just thinking about it honestly. "I didn't," he said. Raven looked at him. "You didn't know?" "No, sir." "Then why did you walk toward it?" Derek looked up. His eyes, Raven noticed, were a light brown color, and there was nothing complicated in them right now. No performance, no after-the-fact drama, just a person answering a question. "Because running would have made it chase us," Derek said. These kinds of animals, the ones built for a charge, their whole system is wired around pursuit. Something runs, they run after it. It's not really thinking, it's more like a switch. The motion turns the switch on, and then everything that moves becomes the target. He looked back at the ground. We had 7 people on that field. If that thing had started chasing us, the math was bad. Someone slow, someone who trips, someone who runs the wrong way, it only needs one. And there was nowhere to go fast enough. The transport was too far. So you stopped, Ravin said. I stopped, and then I figured if stopping works, then maybe moving toward it works better. Because an animal that's confused is an animal that's thinking instead of charging, and an animal that's thinking gives you options. He paused. At least, that's how it is with the animals I know. I didn't know for certain it would work with that one. Ravin absorbed this, but you did it anyway. The alternative was worse. You could have died. Yes, sir. Derek's voice had no particular emphasis on this. It was just a fact placed alongside the other facts. But if I ran, the odds were someone definitely got hurt. If I stood still, maybe only I got hurt. That's better math. Ravin stood there for a moment with that answer. It was not bravery, exactly, the way the word was usually meant. Bravery in the traditional sense involved doing something because it was right even though you were afraid. What Derek was describing was different. It was a calculation, a cold, fast, practical calculation made in under 5 seconds with incomplete information, and the conclusion of that calculation was I am the best option for absorbing this risk, so I will absorb it. Where did you learn that? Ravin asked. Derek thought about it. I grew up near cattle, he said. My uncle's property, big animals, some of them bad-tempered. You learn pretty early that the worst thing you can do when a large animal is frightened or angry is run. You learn to make yourself calm. You learn to move slow. You learn to let them smell you. He turned the cup of water in his hands. Most of it's not even thinking at that point. It's just something your body knows. Ravin nodded slowly. Your body knows, he repeated. You spend enough years around animals bigger than you, it gets in there. Derek glanced up at him. You develop an instinct for it. Something about that word, instinct, sat in Ravin's mind and did not move. He had read about human instincts, the way most coalition officers read about human physiology, as background context. He knew humans were an unusually adaptable species, that they had come from a planet with an aggressive predator ecology, that their evolutionary history was messy and violent, and had produced some attributes that were difficult to quantify. He had never considered that one of those attributes was the ability to look a 4,000-kilogram animal in the eye and make it confused enough to walk away. I need to file an incident report, Ravin said. Derek nodded, yes, sir. I am not sure how to classify your actions in the standard format. Derek looked at him steadily. I didn't follow the retreat order, sir. That should be in the report. Ravin looked at him for a long moment. It will be, he said, along with the outcome. He turned to go, then he stopped. Corporal, he said, without turning back around. Sir. The animal, Ravin said. At the end, when it left, it made a sound. He paused, and you made a sound back. A pause. Yes, sir, Derek said. What was that? The pause this time was a little longer. I don't really know, Derek said. It just seemed like the right thing to do. Ravin nodded. He walked back toward the command building, and behind him he heard Derek finish the last of his water, and the soft sound of the cup being set down, and then nothing else. Inside the base, people had already started talking. Word moved fast in small field stations. By the time Ravin reached the command building, there were looks from his own staff, from the survey team personnel they'd passed in the corridor, from the desk officer who handed him the incident report template without quite meeting his eyes. Not bad looks. Just the particular look that people get when they have heard a story and are quietly revising a category in their heads. The category, Ravin suspected, was the one labeled humans. He sat down at his desk and pulled up the incident template. He looked at the fields: incident description, personnel actions, outcomes, recommendations. He thought about Derek drinking water outside the equipment bay, explaining with no particular drama that he had walked toward a 4-ton animal because the math was better. He began to type. The incident report was 7 pages long. This was unusual. The standard template allowed for a maximum of 4, and Raven had never in his career exceeded that limit. He had always considered concision to be a fundamental quality of good command writing. Say the thing, say it clearly, stop. He had written reports on engagements involving multiple casualties and complex multi-unit actions that came in under 3 pages. The Vores IV Cradleland incident took 7. This was partly because the behavioral documentation was unusually detailed. The Shalari scientists had been recording through the entire event and had submitted 46 minutes of footage and 17 pages of preliminary field notes, which Raven had read 3 times. Their notes focused primarily on the Durok's physiological responses: heart rate, muscle tension, postural shifts, and the way those responses correlated with Derek's movements. The correlation was, the scientists noted with the careful language of people who were not yet ready to make claims, significant and consistent. When Derek stopped, the Durok's aggression indicators dropped. When Derek stepped forward, they dropped further. When Derek made the sound, the Durok's ear position changed in a way associated with social communication rather than threat response. The scientists were careful not to draw conclusions. They were very thorough in the way they avoided drawing conclusions, which itself communicated something. Raven included their preliminary findings in the report as an attachment. The other reason the report was long was the section on personnel actions. Coalition protocol required him to note any deviation from standing orders. Derek had deviated from a direct order in a Class 3 biological hazard situation. That was in the report, clearly and without softening. What was also in the report, taking up considerably more space, was the reasoning Derek had provided afterward and Raven's own assessment of that reasoning, which was, in the careful language of command writing, that the reasoning was sound, that the probability analysis Derek had performed intuitively in under 5 seconds had been correct, that the outcome, measured against the most likely alternative outcomes, represented the best result achievable under the circumstances. He did not write that it was the kind of thinking that could not be trained. He thought it, but he did not write it, because that was the kind of observation that command reports were not the right place for. In Section 7, under recommendations, he wrote 3 things. The first was that coalition survey protocols for Durok-inhabited territories should be reviewed to include contingency guidance for non-retreat scenarios. The current protocol assumed that retreat was always the correct response to Durok contact. The current protocol, he noted without editorializing, did not appear to be complete. The second was that Corporal Derek Hale should receive a formal review of his actions, conducted in context. This was standard language for a situation where someone had technically violated an order, but where the outcome did not support a negative finding. The third was a recommendation that the Coalition Xenological Division commission a formal study of human instinctive predator confrontation behaviors, with specific attention to large terrestrial animal interactions. He noted that current coalition databases on this subject appeared to be limited. He filed the report at roughly 2 in the morning, station time, when the base was quiet and most of the staff was sleeping. Then he went to the small window at the end of the command room and stood there for a while, looking out at the dark shapes of the craterlands in the distance. The mess hall the next morning was louder than usual. Not in a rowdy way, it was a small base, and the personnel were professional, but there was a particular quality to the noise that Raven recognized. It was the sound of a community that had a story. Everyone knew one good story, and this was now the story that Vores IV station knew. He could hear it moving through the conversations as he poured his morning drink, not the specific words, but the rhythm of it, the way voices dropped and then came up again, the occasional pause that meant someone had just heard the key detail. Derek was at a corner table, eating by himself as he often did. Not unfriendly, just self-sufficient. He had a tray of food and a reader propped against his cup, and he was doing what he usually did in the morning, which was eat and read and not require anything from anyone. Two of the base staff were watching him from across the hall. They were not being subtle about it. They were watching him the way people watch something they are trying to understand from the outside, looking for the external clue that explains the internal fact. They would not find it, Ravin thought. It did not live in the way Derek held his fork or the angle of his shoulders. It lived somewhere much further back, in a history that was long and complicated and not available on the surface. Ravin took his drink and crossed the hall. Derek looked up when he reached the table. "Sir," he said, and moved his reader slightly as an indication that the chair across from him was available. Ravin sat down. For a moment they were both quiet, which was comfortable because Derek made silences comfortable. Then Ravin set his cup down and said, "I spoke with the Shalari team this morning about their field notes." Derek looked at him. "They have a theory," Ravin said, "about why it worked. They believe the Duroc has a social hierarchy response that they had not previously identified, that prolonged non-aggressive proximity from a non-fleeing subject can trigger a status assessment behavior rather than a pursuit behavior. They believe you may have inadvertently activated a social protocol that the animal uses when encountering unknown individuals of ambiguous rank within a dominant structure." Derek considered this. "That's an interesting way to put it," he said. "You have a different way to put it." "I would just say the animal didn't know what I was," Derek said. "And when something doesn't know what you are, it watches you instead of charging you. And while it's watching you, you have time." He paused. "Time is most of it in those situations. If you can buy enough time for the threat response to fade, usually the animal just goes." "Usually," Ravin said. "Usually," Derek agreed. Ravin looked at him. "In your assessment, what would have happened if it had not worked?" Derek picked up his fork. "It would have charged. And I would have moved and hoped I was fast enough." He ate a bite of food. "Probably I would not have been. That animal was faster than it looked." Ravin absorbed this. "You knew that at the time," he said. "Yes, sir." "And you still—" "The math was still better," Derek said. 7 people with a bad escape path versus 1 person with a maybe. He shrugged, a small movement. "You do the math." Ravin looked at him for a long moment. This was, he thought, perhaps the least dramatic telling of a near-death experience he had ever heard. And he had heard quite a few. Most of them, even from experienced soldiers, carried some weight of retrospect, some acknowledgement that the thing had been large and the outcome uncertain. Derek described it the way a person describes a plumbing problem they had solved. Something was broken, here was the most logical fix. The fix worked, moving on. Across the hall, a young alien soldier, new to the station, barely through basic training, had been watching them. When Ravin glanced over, the soldier looked away quickly, then seemed to gather something and looked back. He stood up and carried his tray across the hall with the careful posture of someone doing something that required a small amount of courage. He stopped at the end of Derek's table. "Corporal Hale," he said. His translator gave his voice a slight formal edge, the way it did with younger coalition soldiers who had learned their common from the official modules. "I heard about what happened yesterday." Derek looked at him. "All right," he said. The young soldier stood there for a moment. He had the look of someone who had prepared several questions and was now finding that they all felt inadequate. He settled on the one that was most honest. "On your planet," he said, "did humans hunt things like that, things larger than you?" Derek looked at him. The question hung in the air between them, in the warm noise of the mess hall, with the craterlands visible through the window behind it. "Yes," Derek said, We hunted pretty much everything. The young soldier stood there with that answer for a moment. Then he nodded once carefully and walked back to his table and sat down and did not ask any more questions. Ravin picked up his cup. He drank, he set it down. Across the hall, conversations continued. The base did what bases did, processed its morning, moved through its routines, carried its story into the day. And Corporal Derek Hale went back to his reader and ate his breakfast and required nothing from anyone at all.